Okay, so tonight we are reading through Grímnismál. It's a really cool lore book. I'm super excited to read through it. One of my favorite things about the Grímnismál is that we go over some of the uh, some of the realms of the gods, which is really special. So I'm going to find my place here, and we'll get started. So Grímnismál is a book similar to Vafthrûthnismál, being mostly a compilation of mythological lore and having a frame story involving Odin. In this case, Odin disguises himself under the name Shadowed Face, Old Norse Grimnir, which literally translates to the Cloaked One. He's held captive in the court of a king he once favored and delivers his mythic lore to the king's merciful young son after 8 nights of being starved between two bonfires. So Grímnismál appears in both the Codex Regius and in the manuscript AM 748142. King Hrothnung had two sons. One was named Agnar and the other Geroth. Agnar was 10 years old and Geroth was 8. The two of them rowed out in a boat with their fishing tackle and hoped to catch some small fish, but the wind drove them far out into the sea. In the dark night, they wrecked and went up onto the land, where they met a poor farmer, and they stayed there with him over the winter. The farmer's old wife fostered Agnar, but the farmer fostered Geroth and tutored him. Early in the spring, the man gave them a boat, and when he and his wife followed them down to the shore, the man spoke to Geroth in secrecy. The boys departed, and the wind was favorable. They came to their father's harbor, and then Geroth, who stood foremost in the boat, sprang up on land and shoved the boat back out to sea and said, "Go wherever the trolls take you." The boat drifted far out to sea with Agnar, but Geroth went inland to his father's hall. He was received well, but he learned that his father had died, so Geroth was taken as king, and he became a famous man. Odin and Frigg sat in Hliskjalf and looked out over all the worlds. Odin said, "Look how your foster son Agnar sits in father's children on a troll woman in a cave, while my foster son Geroth is king and rules the land." Frigg said, "But Geroth is so stingy with food that he starves his guests if he thinks there are too many." Odin said that this was a tremendous lie, and so he and Frigg made a wager about it. Then Frigg sent her servant Fula to Geroth, and had Fula warn him that a sorcerer had come to the land, but that this sorcerer could be recognized by the fact that even the fiercest dog would not attack him. It was in fact an idle rumor that Geroth was miserly with his food. All the same, he ordered any man who would not be attacked by any dog to be apprehended. Odin came wearing a blue cape and called himself Shadowed Face, but said nothing more of himself even when asked. So the king had him tortured in an effort to extract more information from him, and had him placed between two burning fires, where he sat for 8 nights. King Geroth had a 10-year-old son named Agnar after the king's brother. Agnar went to the Shadowed Face and gave him a full horn to drink, and said he thought his father was behaving poorly to torture a man without cause. Shadowed Face drank, and by then the fire had grown so large that it began to burn his cloak. Then Shadowed Face said, "You're hot, fire, and much too big. Get away from me, flames. My coat is getting burned even though I'm holding it up. My clothing is on fire. I've sat between the fires here for 8 nights, and no one offered or gave me food except Agnar alone. Now Agnar will be the sole ruler of the land of the Goths. Hail Agnar, it's the chief of the gods who's wishing you well. You will never be repaid so well for one drink, no matter how long you live. I see a holy land which lies near those of the gods and the elves. In that place through time, Thor will live till Ragnarok. Ul has built good halls for himself in Udalir. The gods gave Frey the land of Alfheim long ago as a gift in his youth. I know a third place where happy gods live beneath a silver roof. It's called Valaskjalf, the place Odin made himself in the old days. A fourth hall is Sukvabek, which the cool waves crash upon. There Odin and Saga drink happily every day from golden cups. A fifth land is Gladsheim, where gold bright, wide Valhalla stands. That is where Odin chooses from the men killed by weapons every day. Valhalla is easily recognized if one comes to see it. The hall is held up by spear shafts, it is roofed by shields, chainmail is on the benches. Valhalla is easily recognized if one comes to see it. A wolf hangs above the western door, and an eagle above him. Thiassi, the mighty giant, once lived in the sixth hall, now known as Thrymheim, and now Skadi, bright bride of the gods, lives in her father's old home. Balder built himself a hall, and it is called Breithablik. That's a place where I know you'll find little grief. Heimdall inhabits the eighth hall, Himinbjorg. That is where he is the master. In that pleasant house, the watchman of the gods happily drinks his good mead. Freya rules in the ninth land, Folkvang. That is where she arranges the seats. She chooses half the dead who die in battle, and Odin takes the other half. The 10th hall is Glitnir, with gold walls and a silver roof. The god named Forseti is there on most days, and he settles disputes. The 11th hall is Njord's, which he built and named Noatun. That flawless lord of men rules that high-timbered temple. The wide land of Vithar is overgrown with high grass and weeds. That bold son of Odin is preparing himself to avenge his father on horseback. Andrimnir, the cook, lets the pork from Serimnir cook in the cauldron Eldrimnir. There is no better meat, and there are few who know what the Einherjar eat. Battle-winning Odin feeds his tamed wolves, Geri and Freki. But for his part, weapon-loving Odin lives on wine alone. Thought and memory, my ravens, fly every day the whole world over. Each day I fear that thought might not return, but I fear more for memory. The waves thunder, and the Midgard serpent makes his home in Fenrir Sea. Dead men will find that sea passage too wide to wade. Valgrind is a holy hall with holy doors upon a field. The gate is old, and there are few who know how it is locked. Thor's hall, Bilskirnir, has 640 rooms, if all are counted. I'm certain that of all roofed houses, Thor's is the largest. I think Valhalla has 640 doors, if all are counted. 800 Einherjar will walk through each when the day comes to fight Fafnir. There is a goat named Heidrun who stands on Odin's hall and gnaws the limbs of the tree Lorith. That goat fills Valhalla's cups with bright mead from her udders, and that drink will never diminish. There is a stag named Eikthronir who stands on Odin's hall and gnaws the limbs of the tree Lorith. Drops fall from his horns into the well of Hergelmir. That is the origin of all the rivers. The rivers Seath and Veith, Saken and Aken, Swol and Gunthro, Fjorm and Fimbulthul, Rhine and Rinandi, Gipul and Gopul, Gomul and Gervomul, Thun and Vin, Thol and Hol, those conceal the gods' riches. Another river is Vina, another Vexvin, a third is Thjotnuma, sorry, and also Nud and Not, Non and Hron, Slith and Hris, Surg and Urg, Vith and Von, Vond and Strond, Jol and Leipt. These rivers flow near the men who die and go to hell. Thor will wade 4 rivers every day, the ones called Kormt and Ormt, and the 2 rivers Kurlaug when he goes to meetings at the tree Yggdrasil. Bifrost, bridge of the gods, burns in bright flame, and the holy waters seethe. The rivers Glav and Gulir, Glair and Skaithbrimir, Silfrintop and Sinir, Gisel and Falhofnir, Gultop and Letfeti, the gods of Asgard ride their horses every day over these when they go to meet at the tree Yggdrasil. Beneath the tree Yggdrasil are 3 roots which grow in 3 directions. Hel is beneath one, Jotunheim beneath another, Midgard is beneath the third. A squirrel is named Radatos. He runs along the trunk of Yggdrasil. He takes the words of the eagle, tells his insults to Nidhogg below. There are 4 deer who stretch out their necks and eat the leaves of Yggdrasil. Dane and Dwalin, Dunir and Durathor. No fool has ever guessed how many serpents lie beneath Yggdrasil. I think that Goin and Moin, Grabak and Grafoluth, Ofnir and Swolfnir, sons of the snake Grafvidnir, will always gnaw that tree's roots. The tree Yggdrasil endures more pain than any man guess. It's eaten from above by the deer, on the side by rot, from beneath by the serpents. They bring my horn, my Valkyries, Christ and Mist, Skegeld and Skogel, Hild and Thruth, Thok and Herfio, Gol and Gerolul, Rangrith, Rathgrith, and Regenleaf. They bring the Einherjar beer. Those slender horses, Orvak and Osvith, lead the sun across the sky, and the gods have hidden cooling bellows beneath their legs. There is a shield named Swol. It is set between Midgard and the sun, in front of the shining sun. I know the mountains and the sea would burn up entirely if that shield ever fell down from there. Skoll is the name of the wolf who chases the sun till it sets at evening in the woods. Another wolf named Hati is Hrothvitnir's son. He runs in front of the sun behind the moon. The earth was formed from Ymir's flesh, and the sea from his blood, the rock from his bones, the trees from his hair, and the sky from his skull. The happy gods formed Midgard for humans from Ymir's eyelashes. They formed all the grim clouds from his brains. Whoever first puts out the fire will have the help of Ul and all the gods. The realms will be open to all the gods when the kettles are cooled. In ancient days, the dwarves made Skithblatnir, the best of ships for handsome Froy, the strong son of North. The tree Yggdrasil is the best of trees, Skithblatnir is the best ship, Odin is the best god, Sleipnir the best horse, Bifrost the best bridge, Bragi the best poet, Holbrook the best hawk, and Gorm the best dog. I've shown my face in the presence of gods, now help is on its way. It will come to all the gods on Aegir's benches when they drink at Aegir's place. I have called myself Grim, I've called myself Wanderer, Warrior and Helmet Wearer, Famed One and Third One, Thunder and Wave, Hellblind and One Eye, Truth and Swift and True Father, Battle Mary, Battle Stir, Curse Eye and Fire Eye, Evildoer, Spellcaster, Masked and Shadow Face, Fool and Wise Man, Long Hat and Long Beard, Victory Father and War Ready, All Father, War Father, Rope Rider, and Hanged God. I've never been known by just one name since I first walked among men. They called me Shadowed Face here at Geralt's place, but gelding at Osmund's. They called me Driver when I pulled the sleds, and Mighty at the assembly. Among the gods I'm called Wish Granter, Speaker, Just as High, Shield Shaker, Wand Bearer, Greybeard. Wise and Wisdom Granter were my names at Silkmimir's hall, when I deceived that old giant and I killed his famous son. I was his killer. You are drunk, Geralt. You have drunk too much. You've lost too much when you've lost my favor. You've lost the favor of Odin and all the Einherjar. I've told you much and you'll remember little. Your friends will deceive you. I see the sword of my friend dripping with blood. Now Odin will have a weapon-killed man. I know your life is ended. Your guardian spirits are anxious. They see Odin here before you. Approach me if you can. Odin is my name. But before they called me Terror, and Thunder before that, and Waker, and Killer, and Confuser, and Orator God, Heat Maker, Sleep Maker, both gelding and father. I think all these names were used for me alone. King Geralt sat with his sword on his knees, halfway drawn. When he understood that it was Odin who had come to his hall, he stood up and wanted to take Odin out of the flames. But the sword fell out of his hand and then fell hilt first to the ground. The king tripped and fell upon it, so that the sword pierced him through, and he died. Then Odin left, and Agnar was the king of that land for a long time afterward. So, pretty heavy stuff here. Of course, we're going through a story of Odin and Frigg fostering lost children who sailed out that way, and they come back, and whole bunch of crazy things ensue. Um, Geralt essentially betrays Odin with the captivity and starvation there, but he has a merciful son that brings him a horn of drink, and he's blessed by Odin, and Odin begins to talk of some really deep mythological things about the realms of the gods, which I find really, really intriguing. Um, of course, we have the semblance of a spell near the end. Um, Obviously, you don't just randomly fall on your sword and accidentally kill yourself. Um, I guess stranger things have happened, but in the context of the story, it seems very spell-like to go through a list of names and then the person you're talking to accidentally falls and kills themselves. But some really cool stuff. What do you guys think about Grímnismál? What is your what is your perspective on Grímnismál?
I think it's a really interesting story, not only for the background it provides, but kind of this tale. And I feel like um, that information that Odin is giving out is like a blessing of wisdom to this new king, basically, that he's selected um, in the son that was merciful to him. And I think it has something to do kind of with the magics, and there's a certain wisdom where you need to know of a thing in order to use the magic imbued in that thing.
I like that. That's a really cool perspective. Any other thoughts? So I know some of us are busy tonight, so you're not gonna hurt my feelings. But if you have something to say, then absolutely.
Tim, I know there was a typed in question, I believe, on that guy, if you want to read that out loud.
Absolutely. So there's a spell from him to make the fire leave him alone too, which is interesting. Yep, that is true. Kind of hard to talk to someone when you're on fire, so obviously that spell worked. And then Jared says too, it should have included a part at the end where he goes home to Frigg and tells her that she was right, and he apologizes. I would agree, but I think that Odin is a little too prideful for that, knowing what we know about Odin already.
Plus, Frigg was watching the whole time, and just as soon as he walked in, it was that "I told you so" look. Like, no words needed to be said.
Yep. So when you look at the Vafthrûthnismál, they also have a so both Vafthrûthnismál and Grímnismál start off with Odin and Frigg basically having a disagreement about who's right. Um, so when we look at Vafthrûthnismál next week, we'll definitely see that same trope present there. But they're like, but it's not like this animosity, which I find humorous. It's more like that elderly couple that like lovingly bicker with one another. Um, and I just think that's so funny, because it's so human.
Also, one thing I find interesting is like we're not actually 100% sure if he was actually a terrible host. Like, he got some really bad intel, from Frigg's servant, and basically she kind of set Odin up for that. And I wonder, like, obviously, if he had been a decent host, he probably would have still put in a little more consideration, not immediately tortured some random dude. But at the same time, like, if you're expecting to have someone come to your home and cast spells on you and cause trouble for you and yours, I don't think many people are going to be super thrilled to be just the perfect host to that potential threat, especially if you're expecting one.
Absolutely. So,
Oh shoot.
go ahead, Mark.
Just to jump on that same thought, I think that this is a really good example of how so many of the Norse goddesses are not, because you get Frigg, who it tends to be portrayed as the mother, the hearth, the home, very benevolent. But when you read through this, you know she did set him up. She specifically gave that information, or you know gave information that would make Odin present himself in a way to cause hostility. And she's very manipulative. She is tipping the scales in her favor, so she knows from the beginning that she is going to win this argument. Once she says, fine, do what you want, she puts it all in her favor.
Yeah, so in the so Jared had a typed question saying didn't they have a line saying that it was known that he was a bad host. So if you look in the introduction, in the prose introduction, the original accusation from on Garroth from Frigg is that he's stingy with food, that he starves his guests if he thinks there's too many. You jump a few lines down, it says it was in fact an idle rumor that Garroth was miserly with his food. All the same, he ordered any man who would not be attacked by any dog to be apprehended. So I guess in a way, it's kind of a stage that Frigg sets, because not only does she make this accusation on Geralt for Odin, she also sends her maiden, or her handmaid. Let me see the exact word. Her servant Fulla to the king to warn him that a sorcerer was in the land, and that the sorcerer would be known by the fact that the fiercest of dogs wouldn't attack this man, right? So Frigg very much sets up this entire scenario, which is consistent with our prior note that the stage of fate or of life, anything to do with fate or the general direction of humankind, is almost always a feminine role, which is awesome, because without this stage, we would not have the Grímnismál, and in some ways, a not as much of a movement in history within this mythology. So, just to kind of bring some clarity to that point, there's that.
I also found it very interesting that not being attacked by fierce dogs is the sign that she chose. Like, not a descriptor or anything like that, but like that animalistic sense of knowing that either Odin has like a deep connection with like wolves and that kind of thing because he has his two wolves, or he is such a threatening presence that dogs won't go near him.
Yeah, for sure. So I wonder if it's in the sense of hunting dogs, or whether it's in the sense that Odin walked on this land, or this kingdom with Geri and Freki. Interesting thought. And I actually have a question too about the content. It's not necessarily about the introduction or the prologue. Um, prologue, sorry. Pronouncing all those Norse names, it's got my tongue tied. Uh, so with the realms of the gods, like obviously we know about Valhalla or Valhall, as it would be said in Old Norse, and we just learned about Folkvang, or Folkvanger. All of these other different halls and realms, what do you think the purpose of those halls and realms are? Is it just like living abodes, or do you think that this is my question? As I read through Grímnismál last week, we know that Valhall is for the slain, Folkvanger is for the other half of the slain in battle. We know that Hell is like the generic holding place, not necessarily. It's not quite a purgatory in any sense. It's just kind of cold. But what do you guys think, or what do y'all think the other realms of the gods is intended for? Is it intended for Thor to run through, what was it, 640 doors? Or is there more to that?
Well, I know I read a thing. I don't remember the source of it. It may have just been a written down discussion that I had with some people, um, where like Thor has laid claim to like the greatest craftsman, whereas Odin and Freya lay claim to like great warriors, like great craftsmen and tradesmen end up going to Thor. And like these different halls, like at the end of the day, a hall, while it is a home, is also a meeting place. And it's somewhere where you come together as a community. So I would think if you have these great halls, they're never designed to only host one person. In fact, they're very rarely ever empty. So I would think, they would bring in all these people, and if they have all these abodes, or if it's a common use area kind of situation, um, I feel like, there may be, the transport from, you know, uh, in Hell's realm or going anywhere else. There's that movement back and forth with maybe what you did during life can affect maybe what you're doing uh, afterwards and where you go. And it may not even be a permanent residence thing, more as like a gathering place for people where they can both venerate their gods as well as uh, kind of come together with those that are similar to them and that kind of stuff.
I like that a lot, actually, and I think that that makes sense. I was along that same thought, but I didn't want to prompt anything more than just kind of an initial thought. But I know, exactly. So like Odin and Freya are associated with warriors, of the, slain warriors, and you've got all these different gods that represent different attributes of humanity and crafts and trades. So it would make sense to me that if you have a trade of basically warriors, and you've got these great halls, which within the Norse culture, within the mythology, would be like a great feasting place. It would make sense to me that if Thor has a hall that is just as big as Valhall, right? Uh, then maybe this is a place for just like general community, since that would be what Thor was associated with. Within Norse culture, of course, Thor has his own attributes and his own things that he's really really good at. But perhaps it's not, perhaps it's not the case that it's restricted, right? Because 640 doors, assuming like 640 rooms, or maybe 640 entries to the hall. There's obviously limited seating available. But at the same time, there's a whole heck of a lot more than 640 people who have occupied and will occupy the earth. So it makes sense that maybe hell is just the hotel that you stay at, and then when you wake up in the morning, you march on over to Thor's Hall, or wherever you go. Obviously, Valhalla is dedicated to the warriors that will fight at Ragnarok. But when I think of the afterlife, it would not be so bad to visit Froy. Being a beekeeper myself and generally interested in agriculture, it would be nice to visit with Thor, being a woodworker. I've not really been that much of a warrior, but again, my life is not over yet, so we'll see. But I like that thought. And I think that when Grímnismál was written, perhaps that was the intention of the author, and maybe some of the underlying lore is that given the halls that the gods have, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe there's more to it than just being cold where you're at and being hungry. Maybe there's some relief from that, or maybe there's some I don't know. More to be dug into, but I just like the thought of having different places for different gods associated with what your essentially quote unquote calling was in life.
Well, and with that, I kind of call to remembrance like the time where you were closest with your family, where you were all in a space together, was generally winter. You weren't out and about running around doing chores, busy traveling, anything like that. Families came home and stayed together during the winter months. So while it is cold, it may be, yeah, it's cold outside while you are gathered with your loved ones and your family. And it's that close celebration of, surviving a harsh winter where you meet with the spirits and the ancestors and you're gathering together in that. And as you progress, you slowly go there. And then as it thaws, you go out and you venture to the other halls and you can talk and venerate the gods, and be a part of the community, because largely what these various halls end up creating is a community that all would thrive and work together in order to continue on forward from there.
I think I think there's also something to be said, the size of the hall and like the grandiose, like the biggest thing you could imagine, basically. Um, the hospitality of each god or goddess. Hospitality and hearth and home were so important in ancient times, and then as we, I mean, the same thing today. Um, but also there were other um, magical creatures, if you want to say, dwarves, uh, the Vatir, the Vanir, all of these people, they were constantly being hosted between, I would assume, they all communicated with each other, so I can probably assume that they were hosted and had shelter and lodging in any one's hall that they were welcome in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then also there's the concept of Agir's Hall, which we see in Locusina, seems to be kind of like the general feasting place of the gods, outside of Asgard, uh, just kind of like a general assembly slash feasting place for the gods. But no, this is true. Or maybe not. We'll probably need to find a source for it, but it's not a huge stretch of the imagination, I don't think. So plenty of good stuff here, and definitely some more things to kind of research. Obviously, we have some heavy name dropping from Odin on different aspects of the afterlife, and even some like geographical markers for significant things, either in Asgard or Mythgard. Definitely things that I would recommend looking into. Some of these things I'll kind of be looking into myself if I find anything significant, other than just kind of painting the picture of what it is and what it might look like. I'll be sure to bring those sources along with. But that was my probably my biggest question this week was like, when we're talking lore, obviously, like in Norse culture, not everyone was a warrior, not everyone went raiding. It was a hunting and gathering community mostly, and you had that elite class of warriors. So obviously, it was probably the most noble afterlife was Valhalla, but um, that's not necessarily more noble than someone who feeds his community, right? The farmers of the land, because it was very much so that kind of community in all the Scandinavian countries. In fact, that's kind of what made it hard for them to get past that eventual carrying capacity, and a whole slew of other bad things came about from just being a hunting and gathering society. However, there's definitely noble trades in multiple aspects of Norse culture, and it just made sense to me that if Odin is speaking on all of these different halls with these gods that we know represent different attributes of human nature, it would just make sense to me that you would also have multiple creme de la creme, so to speak, of um, farmers, of bakers, of musicians, of agricultural workers, beekeepers. Of course, I'm biased on that one. But it's got some definite, there's some definite best of the best there, and it looks like it appears to me that these halls may be their permanent dwelling spaces, or maybe a general assembly area. Um, but nonetheless, it makes sense. It's not a stretch in my mind and from my perspective for there to be halls dedicated to all of the different trades. As we know, it's a polytheistic religion, so it's more than just the seven. It may just be that hell is like Ben said, the meeting place for the spirits and the ancestors that you meet. And nothing that I've read so far. I could be wrong, and I'll need to look into it. But nothing that I've read so far indicates that any one hall or any one place is a permanent place. Um, so it's very easy to rationalize that you may transition from place to place as you will, where certain names are dedicated to the halls. For example, Valhalla only contains the best of the best warriors for Ragnarok. It may be the case that you have only the best of the best tradesmen, but again, with Ragnarok being like the height of importance for Odin, that may just be a Valhalla specific thing. Um, but happy to look more into it, happy to research it more. Not so sure that it's that I'm gonna come up with anything significant, but I'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Um, but yeah, before we wrap up tonight, that's pretty much all that I had. Any thoughts in closing or any other points that need to be made?
I think just to that last point you made, the only permanent place that I would think of is that secluded part of uh, Niflheim where they say is dedicated to murderers, rapists, and oath breakers. And I imagine that's probably a pretty permanent sentence. But other than that, I largely agree.
Yeah, it seems to be permanent. Yeah. Cool. So next week, we'll be reading through, and discussing the Vafthrûthnismál. That is, I believe, that is the book that precedes the Grímnismál. So let's see here. Yeah, it's the book that precedes the Grímnismál. That's Odin's contest with Riddle Weaver. We're going to be looking at more mythological concepts, which is great. So, yeah, I mean, read up on what you're going to read up on Grímnismál, but we will be getting even further into more mythological concepts with Vafthrûthnismál. Thank you guys so much for chatting, and I will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Also, congrats to Brittany for passing her her third degree in Wicca before anyone goes. So congrats, Brittany. Super proud of you. Awesome stuff.
Congratulations.